Good evening and welcome. If you can get me, then just indicate, please. But you can get me, just indicate so that we can kickstart the program. Do you get me, please?
Okay, sure.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. You are all welcome for today's webinar, and thanks for joining. This is the third webinar in a series. The first one we started with the research methodology, with the research thesis writing, and we particularly saw the introduction. In the introductory aspect, we saw that as a researcher, you need to be able to ensure that you have a good problem statement. We analyzed how you could write a winning problem statement. We saw how to develop research objectives, taking into account the different research types or research questions. We equally said there is one important thing that you need to do before you even start writing your work, which was literature review. Basically, before you want to identify an area of interest, the first thing you do as a researcher is to review literature. And literature serves in so many ways. One of the things you gather from literature is that it enables you to see how others have, what has been done in the field and their methodology that others have used. And so your review of literature is very, very important. We saw the different ways you can review literature, how to structure the literature, conceptual, theoretical, and empirical literature. And today, we are going to one of the most interesting part of the whole research process. I think this is the most difficult part in the whole research process, because this is the only section that gives you room for somebody to replicate what you've done. And so your ability to write this section is vital. When you write even a paper, what researchers do is that they go to, excuse me, there is some sound on the background. Sorry for that. There was some sound on the background. Just need to take care of that. I'm sure we are good to go. So today, as we've seen from my slide, the key thing is research methodology. And I started by emphasizing that this is one of the most important sections of your research work. It is so important that it is the only part that you can easily replicate. And when you carry out your research, you need to be very explicit so that if somebody wants to follow the same approach, the person should be able to adopt what you have done. And for me, I consider the most difficult and the most technical, because you don't just go ahead writing, you must follow the research procedure, the research methodology. So the approach differs. Most of the times, if you are from the pure sciences or physical sciences, the subheadings may differ, but we want to say that we're trying to bring a holistic presentation of what you have to put on your research methodology. So at the end of this presentation, we basically believe that you should be able to understand the following. First, you should be able to write out your area of study, to review your background. Yes, to review the background. The background here is different from the background we did in chapter 1. Here we are trying to structure the context of your study with respect to key aspects. So you have to talk about the area of the study, since each study must be situated to a particular location. So we're actually talking about the physical location where you say the area of the study and things that are pertaining to that are useful with respect to the study. Now, we also have to talk about the designs, research design, and the different aspects of research design. You should be able to understand population, sampling, because these are critical aspects. The method of data collection as well as the tools for data collection. You should be able to validate your instrument as well as check for reliability. And then you should be able to understand data analysis and, most importantly, ethical considerations that are necessary as a researcher to include, you must adhere to. So the world of research is is very, very important to follow what ethical consideration. So in this presentation, we believe that we'll go step by step on these various headings. So thanks for joining as we kickstart the presentation. Now, the first thing we want to see is to talk about the research design. The research design. As a researcher, the first thing you want to do is to determine your research design. And if you see, the research design is considered as what? The overall strategy of your study. It is with the research design that you choose whether you are going to use qualitative data or you are using quantitative data. You decide the method that you are going to adopt. And so the research design is considered what? The overall strategy that you have chosen to integrate the different components of your research. This has to do with the type of data you collect, who will provide you the data, how you contact the person to get the data, and how you even go about measuring the data. So the research design is so important for you to understand. And now we have different approaches and different types of design, but whatever design you use, these are the key things you need to consider as the method is concerned. Now, the first thing you have to understand that we have observational design. Now, observational design or system or method has to do with
Please wait.
Thank you for joining us. Sorry, we had a technical fault, had network issues, but thank God that it has reconnected. So before the break, as the network was concerned, we started with research design. And I indicated that this is the most important part that tells you how you are going to carry out the study, or what have you done, because we are either looking at it as what you will do or what you have done as a work is concerned. So we can basically look at 4 types of designs or methods. For instance, we have the observation method, we have the case study, we have the survey, we have the psychological testing, and the experimental designs. Now, let's take the case of the observation. This is a research design in which you, the participant, observes mostly a natural situation without influencing. There's no intervention. You just observe. For instance, you may just want to see the behavior of children at a particular age. You visit the school, let's say in a school, you go to school and see how children are behaving. As a behaving, you are observing and you are taking down. That is a study that you can. So that is a different type of research design. The next possibility that you may want to choose from amongst is the case study design. Now, the case study design is a bit different. And one thing about the case study design is that you take an in-depth study of a particular thing. Now, you may want to study a human being. You want to take all dimensions of the human being. You are taking a thorough examination of that item. And one of the most common designs that I use around is a survey. Now, the survey is one of the highly utilized methods around. And with the survey design, what happens is that you basically go and survey people's opinion with respect to your subject of interest. It could be their experience, their perception, their feelings, and so on and so forth. This is common for social sciences, where they try as much as possible to get people's opinion. For instance, you want to find out people's voting habit, you can adopt the survey. And with the survey design, basically, some of the common techniques that you may use as tools for collection of data will be the questionnaire, or you could use the verbal interview and many others. The other possibility that you adopt, depending on the field, since some of these designs, they're more prone to some particular fields, will be the psychological testing method. And with this method, you basically want to provide a test and then scores, and you draw conclusion. A good example is the IQ test. Now, they want to test and verify. And the last design is the experimental design. Now, it's important for you that these are general methods. When you go in, you may go into this. For instance, when you talk about the survey, you can have the descriptive survey design. You can have exploratory, others consider exploratory, others talk about causality, and you hear such words with respect to what? Research design. But the key thing is that this different design enables you to collect data using a different approach. How it has to do with it, how to conduct the study, how to go about your research study. And so you have to structure your work and know that, okay, this study that the study I want to conduct, this is the approach I will adopt. I will do better observation. I want to do better case study where I want to study something, maybe over time, taking into account a keen interest and looking at the different dimensions to be able to understand it with total and or the whole entirety, or you just want to survey people's opinion about something. And you could use a questionnaire, you can use an interview, you could focus group. But the most important thing is that you must understand this design that you have chosen. Each design you have chosen will allow you to go about collecting data in a particular approach. So, in sum, with respect to research design, we are saying that it is a masterpiece. When we get to the end of the presentation, I will show some samples so that you can best appreciate what we're talking about. I'll show some samples, different research that have adopted different designs, they have used different population designs and so on and so forth, so that you can best appreciate how this is done in practice. You may not be able to, but the most important thing is to understand that any study you collect will fall in one of these designs. So after understanding the design, the next important thing that you want to choose, as we have said, we have different ideas when it comes to design. We have research design, correlational design, experimental design, quasi-experimental or causal, whatever will fall in the four that we have already described. And now, at times you have to choose, for instance, if you want to survey people's opinion, then you are going with descriptive. And each design is informed by the research questions. It's informed by the research objectives. And at times the field may mandate a particular design. But it is important that you understand that research is a whole process. Your objective, your problem warrants the particular objectives, and particular objectives want you to have what? A particular design that is apt for your study. For instance, if you want to do an experimental design, it will warrant you to know that you are dealing with a situation where you have to administer, and there must be that aspect of randomization of your instrument so that you can control and examine the effect of one thing. Now, if there's no possibility of you to come out with a pure experimental design, you can go for quasi-experimental, in which case you want to divide your population, which you see soon, into what you may decide to take an intergroup. We always talk about intergroup. And there is a lot of criticism with respect to quasi-experimental because it fails to bring in one critical aspect, which is what? Randomization of the LS or your instrument. And when with that randomization, there's a possibility that you have what? Co-founders. Co-founders who influence. Co-founders are variables that influence your dependent variable, your independent variable, of which, if you are not very careful, your conclusions can be erroneous. You may draw conclusions that are wrong because you did not randomize. That's why we have some criticism. The truth is, since our presentation is brief, we may not go into nitty-gritties, but I will show you some samples so that you can best appreciate. And so The next thing when you have decided the design is who is going to provide you the information. You need to know who will provide the information or the materials that are needed to collect the data, in which case we talk about population. Population is the next key concept that is very, very important when you are conducting a study. In this section, you are expected to do what? To describe the participants. What type of sample are you going to use? You must describe the participant. And when we talk about population, we are referring to what? The collection of the objects of interest. Now, population we can define it geographically or in terms of human beings, or we just define it with respect to what? A set of attributes that you want to collect your data from. Please, I don't know who's making that. Just simply mute yourself when you join the platform, please. In order not to distract others, please, when you join, mute yourself. Thank you. So, what are we saying? Population is any specific set of collection of interest that you have. We can talk about geographical. We can talk about maybe in terms of a country. Geographical can take a country. For instance, you are studying something, COVID-19 in Cameroon, the manifestation, the practices, and so on and so forth. That is what a geographical description of your population. You may be interested in a particular age group. I'm interested in teenagers, or I'm interested in elderly. That is what is still form your population. You may be interested in drug addicts. It could be students, and so on and so forth. So you must specify. Now, when we come to population, we want to narrow from the general, you start narrowing down to maybe a more targeted population from your target. The target population is a group of individuals that you intend to conduct the research and draw conclusion with respect to. Now, we can say we are studying COVID-19, and we're studying COVID-19 in Cameroon. By the end of the day, you discover that you may still narrow it down to a certain group. Yes, why COVID-19, studying COVID-19, there is a target group, and target group now will be Cameroonians. So when we talk about population, we have to talk about the group of interest that you really want to collect your data. You want to collect your data from this specific group. And once you have done that, we can now move on to another very important aspect in research methodology, which is sample. Now, it's often difficult to get information from everybody of interest. If you could get everybody, wow, that's wonderful. And in which case we call it what? In which case we talk about a census. In a study where you want to constitute the whole population, we call it a census. But many times researchers do not actually use a census. It's very costly. It's difficult to get everybody. And so because of that, what researchers simply do is that they take what we call a sample. So a sample is simply a subset of your population. It's a proportion of your population. And sampling depends on what? Certain things that define how you go about sampling. Now, if your study is quantitative, most of the times it's recommended that you use a representative sample size. If your study is qualitative, representation of a samples of the population, getting a certain number might not be necessary. We'll talk about data saturation when you are dealing with qualitative data. But we are indicating that sampling is a subset of your population because it will be costly in terms of physical resources, or be costly in terms of it will be impossible in some cases to get everybody. And so you have to go to sampling. And why researchers use sampling is because of what we call the central limit theorem, especially for quantitative analysis. The central limit theorem says, if you take a population and you randomly divide the population into equal proportions, then once you take data from a subset, that subset can give you information. For instance, if you're looking at the average you get from your sample will be approximately equal to the average of or the mean of the population with a certain confidence level. And because of that, we say that it is more preferable for you to take a sample in order to carry out your study. Now, there are different sampling techniques or sampling methods. For quantitative studies, we have sampling methods, or probably we can divide sampling into two types. We have the probability and the non-probability sampling. Now, with the probability sampling, the common sampling approach is that you are trying to give equal representation for your participants. You want everybody to be able to participate in the study as much as possible. However, we still find it difficult to give equal chance for everybody. That's why we will see other sampling techniques like cluster sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, which gives that possibility, but you need to take a subset. For instance, let's take the first sampling method, which is simple random sampling. Simple random sampling is the best sampling method in quantitative studies, if you can use the simple random method. But it's one of the most difficult methods to come by, because for you to be able to use simple random sampling, you must have a sampling frame. You must have a sampling frame. And sampling frame simply means there is a way for you to embody everybody. Take, for instance, you want to study, you are treeing a dike. You know that there are 6 outcomes. So you can use simple random. The American lottery system, if the practice what they say, they use the simple random because it gives equal chance for everybody to participate. It doesn't matter whether you're Cameroonian, you're an American, or you come from which part. So long as you form part of that population and you are in the population, you are given the same chance for being selected. 2 persons can be selected. When it comes to American lottery, 2 people can be selected from the same home. That I'm selected and you are my brother, it in no way reduces your chance as a brother from being selected. So we say equal chance for everybody with simple random. Now the next is the stratified sampling method. Now with the stratified sampling method, the researcher here decides to divide the population using some certain criteria that is unique and different across the population. We're saying unique and different. For instance, let's say you want to study COVID-19, and now you are looking at what? The population. Now you discover that there's something about the population that is very, very important for you to take into account. Age. The way COVID-19 will affect children might be different from the way it affects adults and might be different from the way it will affect the elderly. And because of this, you want to stratify your population to make sure that there is equal representation across the different age groups. In such a case, we have a strata. Or you are studying schools. You are studying schools and you may want to divide your schools into different groups. We have public schools, mission schools, and lay private. So those are different strata that you want to gather participants from to take part in your study. And so in your method, you want to be able to explain how you identify your population, how you went about recruiting the population, and what exact tool did you use, right? It is very, very important. We have the systematic. With the systematic is similar to the stratified sampling technique, but the difference comes in terms of what? You divide your population and you decide that, okay, if I want to divide after every 5 persons, I will pick. Let's say you said you are the 1,000 participants, you number the 1,000 participants, you say, okay, when I pick, after count 1, 2, 3, up to 5, the 6th person will be taken, the 12, the 18, and so on and so forth. There is what? A systematic way that you are taking participants, but everybody has equal chance to an extent because you can start from any angle. After 5 persons, you pick somebody. After 5, you pick. After that. So it is systematic sampling. There is a systematic way of collecting participants, and it's important. Now, one thing about research methodology is each step or any decision you take must be justified. What makes you think that stratified random sampling will be the best that gives you? Because the problem with it will be of no value when you have a wonderful study and you collect data from a wrong population. Your study is so wonderful, the topic is so nice, the problem is so great, but then the people who provided the information are not the right persons. Then your work will not be useful. Let's say you are trying to study something about marriage, a marriage life. The best person to give you will be couples, right? When you go and study children, unless you are getting an aspect that children may be well informed, but you have to get to this person. So you must justify why you think your population meets the study objectives. Then we have the cluster sampling, where once you divide, you can cluster your population in different regions, and you decide to take a particular region to represent. We have convenience sampling, which is one of the most common sampling methods. And convenience sampling simply allows participation of your respondent in terms of what? Their availability and is accessible. They've accepted to participate in the study, in which case we talk about the convenient sampling method. The next sampling method you may want to use is judgmental or purposive. Why do you consider a particular participant? When you're dealing with qualitative data, most of the time you use judgmental because you want to include somebody using a certain criteria. There's a criterion for including somebody. Maybe it could be knowledge. That's why we talk about key informants. The people are well knowledgeable about what you are studying and you want to get data from them. So you say they're key informants and you include them because of their knowledge. You include them because of their experience. You include them because of something that makes them what? Important. In this case, you are the researcher deciding that this person is apt to participate in the study. Now, if it is qualitative in nature, it's not about sample, but it's about what the quality of the information the person can provide for you. Now we have the snowball method. The snowball method comes in when you don't know your population and you depend on the participants to help you identify the rest of the population. For instance, let's say you are studying post-abortion care. And post-abortion care might be a sensitive topic and you find it difficult, people may find it difficult to actually reveal to you that I've had an abortion for whatever reason, whether induced or whatsoever. But when you get one person who have experienced it, and the person's after interviewing the person can recommend another person with the same experience. When you get to the second person now, the second person can easily give you information because at least this is what A said, and you're coming to B. B will easily provide you information. We call it the snowball. So you must be able to decide how you go about recruiting participants for your study. And so you have to indicate why you think the snowball is up, why you think judgmental is ideal, or you're using the quarter sampling, what makes you think is ideal, or you are going for non-probability sampling in general, what makes it ideal? At times we can use what? A mixed sampling or multi-stage sampling, or a combination of different sampling methods if your population is not uniform. So it is very, very important to understand. For instance, let's say I'm conducting a study and I want to explain how I went about recruiting my respondent. I can say, I use convenience sampling to recruit my participant. And how did I go about adopting the convenience sampling? Basically, a flyer was distributed by the researcher to different community centers, requesting those who are willing to participate in the study to contact the researcher. Now, first simply ask those who are willing and were of what? The right population to participate when they indicated their interest. So you are using convenience and you are also using what? The availability of the people because they choose to participate. So you have to explain how you went about recruiting your participants. So the next thing to understand as sampling is concerned is, so apart from sampling, one key thing that you need to do as your research methodology is when you have identified your design. You are going for quantitative or qualitative data. You've decided who provide you with the information. The next thing is what we call instrumentation. Instrumentation refers to the tool that you, the researcher, wants to use to investigate or to measure your variables of interest. How are you going to measure your variables? And what tool are you using? What technique are you using? Now, when it comes to instrumentation, we have questionnaire, we have interview guides, we have checklists, we have focus group discussion, and experiment. If you are very keen and you understood what we say with respect to research design, you discover most of them, some of these techniques can best do well with a particular design. For instance, questionnaire is the most common data collection tool. And so you need to indicate that you are using a questionnaire and why you choose to use a questionnaire. How did you design your questionnaire? Maybe your questionnaire was designed into sections. Section 1 has to do with demographic information. Section 2 had to handle this aspect. Section 3, did you divide the new questionnaire or you adapted? You adapted a questionnaire, you adopted and modified, or you use what? A standardized instrument to collect your data. So you must explain and be explicit. Were you dealing with linked item questions, or was open-ended, close-ended, and why you think that close-ended questions were ideal? Or was semi-structured questionnaire, and why you choose the semi-structured questionnaire? So in all, each decision you take, you must justify, because when researchers or reviewers or whoever is reading your work, the person wants to judge how valid your work is based on what? The judgment that you made as a researcher to use that particular design, to use the particular population, to use the particular tool for data collection. So you have to indicate, how did you go about administering? That has to do with the procedure. How did you go about administering collecting your data? Did you go by meeting people? Was it online? Was it offline? Was it self-administered? Did you use data collectors? You must. And if you use data collectors, were they trained people or you trained them? How did you go about? How was it training? You must be able to explain in detail how your instrumentation was done in terms of collection and in terms of designing of the instrument and in terms of the procedure adopted for the study. Now we have interviews. Interviews are wonderful when you are collecting qualitative data. And with interviews, we have unstructured interviews, we have structured interviews. Whichever method you choose, you need to explain why you think it was ideal, right? So you choose the interview. Was it the structured? Now with the structured interview, it simply means you have predefined questions for all your participants, and they're bound to answer just the questions. But for a structured interview, you give room for the way you go about interviewing is based on the person's response. So it's more open as you are going and the person says, this is how you can now bring in the next question based on the person's response. That is what unstructured interview, open-ended. There are no predefined limits, but with structured interviews or interview guides, you basically give the same question to all the respondents. Here, it gives you room to collect kind of structured data or data that you can standardize and analyze using even some quantitative techniques. Then we have the checklist. Let's assume you are studying infrastructure in a school, the didactic infrastructure as well as other infrastructure. So you have to go with a checklist because you see, do they have a board? Yes. Do they have markers? Yes. They don't have, you tick. So you are using a checklist to identify and say this one is happening. Or you want to observe even a human being. You are doing observation and you have a checklist. If this person does this, you tick, or doesn't do, you tick. So you can use a checklist. With a focus group discussion, especially when you are doing, is that you group persons together and you ask them questions and they answer. It gives room for them, could be in a group of 5 to 6 or 8. Some people recommend 8 or 6 at least, or 5. So whatever group you choose, you need to explain to the persons, the objective of the study, why they study, and then you start interviewing. A gives a response, B contributes, and so it's a good way of collecting data for collecting qualitative data. It may be difficult to come by because some of these methods, some of them are relatively complex. It may be difficult to group persons together, but when there's a possibility, you adopt the focus group approach to supplement it maybe with interviewing individually. Because with a focus group, it gives room for what? Interaction of responses. Yes, as A says, you say, okay, based on what you have said, this is what I want to add. My own experience, apart from this is because you are trying to do what? To survey people's opinion about something. You go bit by bit trying to ask. Then we have the experimental design, experimental technique. If you are doing pure sciences or physical sciences, you're in a lab, you have to do what? To design some instruments so you can measure and examine cause effect. So when you are writing up, you may, for instance, you may want to say who collected data. Undergraduate research assistant was employed for the study, and they went out to survey, or maybe you had two undergraduate research assistants who participated, who act as surveyors, who went out and administered the instrument. It's good that you indicate how you went about collecting the data. Was it social workers that collected the data? Were you research assistants? And it is important for you to note that gender, race, ethnicity are elements that may influence your results. Those are some sensitive things that may influence your results. So you have to check how up your instrument is with the population. For instance, when you take a questionnaire and you're going to illiterate, somebody cannot read and you want to administer a questionnaire, or children below 5 years, you may not be able to use what? A questionnaire. So you see how population meets with what? The instrument. So those are some things that you have to also consider. Now, the next thing is about reliability and validity. Once you have designed the instrument, whether you adopted an existing instrument or it's a new instrument, a question arises: is your instrument valid? How valid is your instrument? How reliable is your instrument? And reliability are like twin brothers. They move together to give you quality work. When we talk about validity, we're looking at the extent to which a test measures what you want it to measure. With the validity, you want to ensure that if you are studying an issue, it should be able to give you the right results. And so with validity, we talk about content validity, phase validity, construct validity, and so many other types of validity. So you have to consider different validities, how you will ensure them. For instance, phase validity, presentation of your instrument is good. Let's assume you did went to administer the questionnaire. And so the questionnaire you printed and did photocopies, the photocopies were very dirty. It discourages the participant from even responding, or you are struggling to answer. Maybe questions were just typed, they were nowhere structured, the presentation was funny. Then we lack first validity. Now, content validity is ensured. Many times, researchers, especially quantitative researchers, they face difficult ensuring content validity, but you may use experts. For instance, you want to study something, you have your objective, you are designing your instrument, and you say, okay, you create what we call content validity index, where you outline each question with respect to specific objectives, and you submit to some experts to review. For instance, this particular question, to what extent do you think it measures, it can help me achieve this objective? Let's say a scale from 1 to 5, and so somebody with 5 means to a greater extent, it gives you assurance that, okay, your instrument is valid. But if somebody says 1, it means that instrument or that particular question is not very valid. That's how you ensure content and construct validity. At times, you employ the services of experts. Now, once you are done that, you come and calculate content validity index. And if the content validity index is above, maybe above 0.8, your instrument is wonderful. You can go ahead and administer. But validity alone is not enough. You have to ensure reliability. Reliability has to do with consistency of results. Consistency, if I administer this instrument to a group of persons and go and administer the same instrument to the same next group of persons with same characteristics, I should be able to have what results that are similar. And so over time, if I use an instrument this year and next year I use the same instrument, same group of persons, my results should be what? Consistent, except for other control factors that I might not have taken. So you have to talk about consistency of the test. And to exist, and talk about consistency, we have internal consistency, external consistency, even validity, internal validity, external validity. You must ensure some of this. Let's take the aspect of internal consistency. If you are dealing with leaked item questions, for instance, you may see that for you to ensure internal consistency, you have to calculate Conch bar alpha, where you need to see the relation, the correlation that exists between your instrument. And so items with the recommendations items above 0.7 are wonderful, but they should not be too high, maybe 0.00, 0.9999 becomes problematic. So we have to check for consistency using different techniques. When we'll be talking about data analysis, you will see how you can ensure some of this, because some aspect here has to do with what? Analyzing using statistical techniques to arrive at acceptable standard or what is acceptable. So that is the aspect. Like we are saying, when it comes to reliability, you want that your Conch bar alpha should be above, especially with internal consistency, should be above 0.7. And we said validity, construct content, you must ensure that. Let's take the example of reliability and validity. You have a scale of 2 kilobucks. And now you want to evaluate how reliable and valid is your measurement. So you bring an item and you check. I know that my item, the kilometer is 2, and you come, for instance, scale A gives 2.5, 2.5, 2.5. It's consistent, right? But scale B, you discover that the same instrument is 2.2 kilograms. This one gives 2.5 kilograms, 1.5. What you notice is that it lacks consistency, right? So an item or an instrument that is not consistent should be rejected. Questions that do not have consistent results, the reliability level is low, should be removed from your instrument. And so like we said, this is something you have to do some mathematical calculations. And when you have validated your instrument, you have defined your variables, which we will not talk about variables here because it's a whole lot topic that we have to discuss it. Different aspects of variable, the different types of variable, how you go about talking about measuring variables. You now have to explain your research methodology as data is concerned, data analysis is concerned. How are you going to analyze your data? Now, how are you going to analyze and interpret your data? You have to use some statistical procedures, and these statistical procedures are informed by what? Your objectives, your research design, and the nature of data you've collected. So use mathematical or scientific procedures, laid down principles to discover causes, discover factors, and identify trends. And so in doing this, you need to know that data analysis can be divided principally into descriptive and inferential. And we can equally look at data in terms of quantitative data and qualitative data. The type of data, whether quantitative or qualitative, determines how your data will even be analyzed, the different techniques that you can use, and the instrument that you use. For instance, when you are dealing with quantitative data, and you want to use instrument, common instrument, you may want to use SAS, you may want to use SPSS, you want to use R, you may want to use Stata, and so on and so forth. Now, one thing about these different statistical techniques is that all of them are so wonderful, but there is no one that is universally best. For instance, SPSS can be good in descriptive statistics, but may not do well with respect to regression analysis when you have to go to some kind of complicated or more advanced regression methods. You may not be able. SPS may be good, but it might not be able to do good panel analysis or time series analysis as compared to SAS or Stata. So the technique you use and even the package you use to an extent will be determined by the technique you want to use. However, in my experience as a statistician, whether you are using SPSS, you are using SAS, you are using R, you are using Python for analysis, at the end of the day, your results will likely be the same. Mean in SPSS, mean in SAS, mean in eViews will give you the same results for the same variable or the same data set. If they are different, then I don't see how they should be different. So one of the things when we are teaching our data analysis, we focus more, no, we cannot go into details here, we focus more on what? Understanding how to interpret. Yes, you can use any technique, but do you know how to? If you say a mean of 20, we are talking about yes, a mean of 20, what does it mean? And how important is for you, the researcher? How do you go about interpreting it? As a research assistant, as a data analyst, I basically, when I analyze data for a client, I have to explain, this is what this means, this is how you have to go about, or if you are interpreting, this is how you can interpret your result, this is how you can discuss your result. A mean in itself might mean nothing until you attach it to the relevant context. Your context of study will justify how you go about even discussing your results and understanding the relationship between the variables. So it is important for you to understand. However, as we indicated, you can talk about your research and your quantitative analysis into descriptive or inferential, or you talk about what? Descriptive analysis, you talk about exploratory analysis, predictive analysis, and inferential analysis. These are kind of different types. Though they're similar, they share a lot in common. For instance, descriptive and inferential, then descriptive talks about your sample, but inferential talk about the population. Once you calculate mean and standard deviation, those are descriptive techniques. But if you want to draw population inference with respect to the population from what you have discovered in the descriptive, you will need to employ the aspect of what? Inferential techniques. If you're looking for differences, you may employ independent sample t-test. You can use one sample t-test, you can use two sample, you can use ANOVA, and so on and so forth, depending on your technique, depending on what you are looking for, depending on the assumptions that underline the technique and how they fit your data. If you are dealing with categorical data and you want to look for association, you may use chi-square. But if you are dealing with continuous data, which I believe if you don't know what continuous data is and categorical may be challenging, you may want to adopt what? An inferential technique. So it's important for you to understand, because when you are writing your chapter 3 or your methodology section, it's always recommended, if you're not a statistician, seek the assistance of a statistician. This is where we face a lot of challenges as statisticians, because you design your instrument without taking into account your objectives. At the end of the day, you don't take account maybe how the literature, what the literature says, but a good instrument must take into account your objective, take into account your research questions, take into account what you are trying to get in terms of a problem, so that even your analytical technique must be justified. So you must ensure that these things, they work hand in glove, they are not independent. So when you get to, if you have been working alone without the services of a research assistant, and you are not a statistician, I read something somewhere, whether you know it, seek the services of a statistician, whether you don't know, seek the services of a statistician. What is the moral of the idea? You need somebody with statistical knowledge to guide you to design a good instrument. And you need a person to guide you to be able to analyze your data in a way it is apt to answer your research problem. There is something we always say as statisticians with respect to data. Now, once you have a problem, you need to define the problem, and that problem must be rightly defined. So you have to define the right problem and define the problem rightly. You have to collect your data and collect the right data. Collect the data rightly and collect the right data. Those are two different things. Now, collecting the right data and collecting the data rightly, they are two different things. And so you must take into account that aspect. Now, once you want to analyze the data, yes, just analyzing the data is not a problem. Everybody can, once you have SPSS, you can click and give mean. But once you start asking for mean for categorical variables, it means you don't understand. You add gender and you are getting a mean. Gender would, it's a categorical variable, and a mean will not be, it will be useless because you cannot add. Categorical variables may not take on what? Additive rules or divisions, and so you will not be able to have a mean that has meaning. So without the services of an expert, there's a tendency that you have analyzed the data, but the data is wrong. The analytical technique tool is wrong. What you have used is wrong. So it's recommended that you seek the services of an expert to help you go how to design your, analyze your data. And this has to do with what? Having an analytical plan. You must have a plan that you've adopted to use in order to solve, to analyze your data. It's always good that you have a plan. If you can meet a statistician just to develop a plan for you, not necessarily to analyze the data, but to develop a plan. The person look at your objectives and say, okay, based on this objective, this is the best tone that you can use. There are other advanced techniques, you can say model specification. You want to specify your model. You're looking at GDP, factors that influence GDP. There are so many things that influence GDP, but you must decide the ones that you are using and you develop a model. Now, once you develop a model, you also have to do what? To know that we have validation techniques for the model. How did you ensure that your model is valid? So once you have done this, the most important part, which is almost one of the key things that we say, is ethical consideration. Ethical issues are critical in research studies. We need to be able to point out how ethical. An ethical issue means you have to explain, how did you employ the people? You sought their concern through, if it's a questionnaire, you have a cover letter. If it's an interview, you may send what? A consent form. They read and they form. You explain to them in the consent form, you indicate the objective of the study, and if there is any known harm, you must give them before. If there's no known harm, you indicate. So that you should know that my participation in this study, if there's this risk or there's a benefit, you need to identify that. And you have to tell readers, because that is what they use to judge the credibility of your results. Was participation voluntary? You need to indicate. Was there confidentiality? And how did you ensure confidentiality? Aspect of anonymity, whereas people participation anonymous, you don't have to identify somebody by their name, and the data you collected. For instance, if you're taking pictures or you're taking videos, you're taking voices of persons, did they accept that you take their voices? And once you take their voices, how did you make sure that you don't disclose their identity or something that may bring them harm in any way? You must be ethical. That is with respect to data collection. And as well, you must be ethical throughout the whole research process with respect to sourcing your ideas and giving the data you have collected, whether literature review, you have to do to go ahead and indicate sources. It should be referenced. A direct quotation must go with a reference. You have to paraphrase. Ensure that what? You don't plagiarize people's work. Those are ethical issues in the whole research process. And once you have done that, I believe you will have a great work. So in all, what are we saying? As a researcher, the research methodology section of your study is very, very important. It is the only section of a study that is replicable. Somebody can come and replicate what you did and see whether the person will have the same results or not. And so in this section, you start by describing your area of study in details and the attributes that are useful in that area of study. Once you have identified the area of study, you have to bring in the aspect of what? Research design. The research design, we have indicated there are different designs, and you must choose among the many designs, the one you consider apt. From the design, you have to justify why you think that this design is the best by indicating that, okay, based on this, I think that this design, based on my objectives, based on I'm trying to survey people's opinion. So I think that this design is the best. So you have to indicate that. And once you have done it, you have to move on and talk about the population. The population is very, very important because from the population, you make the researcher to understand or the reader to understand that the person you collected data from is the most ideal person who can provide the right information. And how you went about selecting your participant and how the instrument you use, were you questionnaires, interview guide, how did you go about that? You must and explain, because somebody should be able to read and follow and can reproduce what you have done. And you have to talk about validating your instrument as well as going further to talk with respect to what? Ensuring that your data analysis is up. So basically that is a brief structure of how your chapter 3 should look like, or the research methodology. Some it might not be chapter 3, so how your methodology section should. And I want to show 2 examples of ready-made works so that you can also review it. So let me just bring up here. Let me share my screen with you. Now, with me here, I have a sample chapter. Just zoom it so you can see. As you can see here, we have chapter 3, research methodology. The person simply start with an introduction and state that with this, I'll talk about the research design, the area of study, the population, the sample, the sampling techniques, the instrument of data collection, validation of the instrument, administration of the instrument, and so on and so forth. That's the introductory statement. At times, some people advocate that you even have to revisit your research objectives. Now, from there, you bring in your research design. And so in this study, the researcher adopted what? The researcher chose a survey redesign, some talk the descriptive survey design. And the person says, because it best serves to answer the questions and the purpose of the study. Now, the justification here might not be very explicit, but you need to give a justification that is explicit for your reader. The survey design is one of the groups on which are interested and so on and so forth. The person is just still trying to establish. And it's a design that enables you to assess public opinion or individual characteristics by the use of a questionnaire to gather quantitative method. So that's what the person indicated. The limitation of the study, some people will put in their background or area of study or chapter 1 or scope of study, but wherever you put it, what is important, I'm not giving you where you should put items, but each heading, what is useful. You have to say how you delimited your study in terms of, maybe if you're talking about delimitation as scope here, content delimitation, you must focus on your objectives. We talk about geographical delimitation, where is the study's focus in terms of physical, geographical, and what are the things that make the study ideal in such an area. And then you have to talk with respect to maybe other time frame where it's cross-sectional or longitudinal study. So that's why the person talks about here. You can see a delimitation is talking about perception of teachers, that's content. Then schools in Nigeria, or that has to do with geographical. This is a breakdown. Population, who are there? Yeah, music teachers and music educators in Nigeria. That is population. From there, you have to talk about how you go about sampling. The person talks about sampling, which sampling method was used, the inclusion criteria and the exclusion criteria. The person says this was stratified random sampling. Why did the person use stratified random sampling? We said the person was dealing with state government and private-owned schools. So that's why you have to ensure that you use stratified random sampling. And then proportionate stratified random sampling to make sure that there's representation. Instrument for data collection, interview schedule. So the person used by interview to interview the teachers and questions related to the different aspects of the study. And okay, it was a combination, it was interview and questionnaire. At times you indicate, and how was the structure of the questionnaire? I think we did indicate that the questionnaire had 5 aspects. Section A was personal data, section B, needs of with respect to different objectives, how many items were under a question, and so on. An objective or a section, you need to specify that in your methodology section as questionnaire is, instrumentation is concerned. How did you validate? We mentioned first validity and content validity. We also talk about the aspects of using, so the person have indicated, the person you linked items at the end of the day, 3 point, how you was maybe 5 for strongly agree, and so on and so forth. And the pilot study, I think we did not mention the aspect of pilot study, which is something you have to do. It's very, very important to always ensure that you ensure you must do a pilot study, especially for applied studies. Do a pilot study. A pilot study is necessary because it helps you to modify, it helps you to even check for reliability and validity of your instrument before you go ahead conducting and concluding your study. And so method of data analysis, this is how the person went. I'll show you the second example just for us to appreciate it. And with that, I'll open our presentation for questions. Yes. Just give me a second as I share my screen with you. Okay. Now you can see my screen. Here, the person starts, unlike the others, without a brief introduction, or it depends on the context. So we don't start with area of study, and the person is basically trying to study telecommunication companies. And this one is in Boya in particularly. And you just give a brief background, explain the different companies, what they do, and how they are useful with respect to the study. Useful with respect to the study. And so from there, we talk about the design. So use descriptive cross-sectional survey, and the justification was suitable for its ability to collect original data from a large population. That's the justification the person gives. It's also enabled the collection or to analyze data across a large sample population for a given period of time, mostly cross-sectional. And so it also gives room for what quantitative. And quantitative, you can collect data from a sample representation and do reference with respect to the population. And so the person was trying to study what the mediating role of customer satisfaction on ethical practices and customer loyalty. Now, with respect to data collection, the person indicated different sources in terms of primary and secondary sources. And primary data was mainly used firsthand. And how did the person go about? The instrument was structured questionnaires, and it was preferred because this justification, like we earlier indicated, there's a justification why the person is using that technique or that tool to collect data. Data collection procedure, how did the person go about doing it? Or data collection instrument was a questionnaire. How was the questionnaire designed? Using, now the person says we'll use what? A standardized questionnaire adopted and modified. Was adopted and modified questionnaire of Lin and Wong 2012. So that's why we said your instrument, you can either adopt an existing instrument, maybe test its validity with respect to your context, or you can design one. Whatever approach is recommended that you do, validate the instrument. Next, we see how the questionnaire maybe was linked, combination of both 7-point, 5-point, strongly agree, satisfaction, and so on. Detailed explanation. Then data collection procedure was physical present, using research assistant, as the person indicates. Population talks about the sampling, the sample size, and so on. Sampling, formula calculation, and you can talk about the sampling, use stratified sampling. Okay, also stratified sampling to ensure that all the companies partake and was proportionate to ensure what? Adequate participation from the different participants. And so analysis, talk about descriptive using mean, frequencies, and the rest. And we go to model specification. Now, we may not talk more into this model specification because more analytical in nature, and we have been going for so long with our presentation. And finally, validation. The last aspect is ethical issues. Ethical issues, some people talk about limitations. The person talked about defining objective, make sure the first thing, authorization to collect data was obtained, and respondents were, there was strict confidentiality, no personal information like names were adopted. And so with that, we come to the end of our presentation and we open the platform for questions. A few questions and we should be done as our study is concerned. Any question, please, you go ahead and ask your questions. Whether you're online, offline, wherever you are, you can ask your questions. So we attend to them. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the appreciation. Any question? Anybody with a question? I was indicating with respect, there's a question or contribution with respect to survey design. It could be called cross-sectional, descriptive survey, wisdom. But I said it is important that you consider when you hear descriptive survey design, you must think in the light of when we talk about descriptive, you are trying to look at more or less from the analytical perspective and how your data is collected. But when you say cross-sectional, you're looking at the aspect of time. Time plays a role on how whatever you are saying. Is it just a one-time study or is it a study over time? So if it's a study over time, we talk about longitudinal study, but if it's just one time, you say administrative questionnaire just once becomes what? Discrete, just survey that focusing more on cross-sectional data. Yes, we have so many designs. We have so many designs. Like I said, if you are from the humanities studies field, most often you have historical, where you have to do with archival, you have to go back to the library and collect information. So it's historic in nature, right? Like we said, we have observational, but we can further break down this phenomenal. If you are from the anthropological background, you have different design. We are from the banking. We can talk about ex post factor, where you have do an impact study. So there are different design, but what we did was give you the key dimensions of the designs. Are you observing? Are you surveying people's opinion? Are you doing an experiment? Or you are doing an in-depth study? So you can further break down now, use different names based on the field, or you are doing experimental based on the field, right? So if you are from the historic or doing humanities, you deal more with historic and has to be archival records. And so your design will be different. With trend, you can use panel data, which has to do with what export factor design. With export factor, for instance, if you're studying the economic growth in Cameroon over 30 years, you use an export factor. You, the researcher, has nothing to do. As the data is concerned, you have no control over the data. You're collecting data on something that's already happened. You just want to examine the effect. It's an export factor. And you can see the trends. You do trend analysis. So the trend has to do with analysis, not a design, analytical technique that you're using. Few more questions, and sure. Okay, before we go, this webinar has been organized by First Links. First Links has been powered by First Links Foundation, and First Links is out to ensure that the main objective is promoting academic excellence. That is what we believe, that in order for somebody to succeed, education is key. Education plays a key role, and so giving the right education, more or less practical, they will be able to transform life and make life better. And so we believe in promoting academic excellence through teaching, writing, and publishing. We teach, we write, and publish. In the aspect of teaching, what we do free seminars. We have paid programs. For instance, on the 16th of October, we'll be having a master class on data analysis. We're having a master class on data analysis, which is an opportunity for you to participate. It's a paid program, but it has been subsidized by the foundation to make sure that many persons can benefit. So that many persons can benefit. I'm sure they will send the flyer in the platform so you see the fee. And it is an on-site program. It's not an online, it's an on-site program. But if people show interest, we may do another one online. But yeah, it has to do with data analysis. We'll cover descriptive analysis. We'll talk about different analytical inferential analysis. We'll see correlation, we'll talk about independent sample, one sample. We see regression, hierarchical regression, and different analytical techniques like mediation moderators so that you can analyze your data, or when you seek the services of a research assistant, you can best judge what he or she has done because you have an understanding. So the program is designed both for advanced learners, statisticians, as well as newbies, and will be in the morning starting from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So it's a whole day long program. It's a whole day long program to cover the techniques. We'll share the flyers and you'll be able to go through. And if you're interested, then you can get in contact. I'm sure the number is on the platform for you to come and attend and learn how you can analyze data on your own. Then how to be able to review and know whether the work the statistician did meets the appropriate design. So any question again? Okay, I have a question, please. What data analysis method is most appropriate when verifying cause or drivers of a particular phenomenon? There are so many. We need to understand the variables. I also find another question here from Mr. This says, my question, what are the main ethical issues in data collection? Now we said with respect to ethical issues, we've mentioned the aspect of anonymity of the participants, voluntary participation, explaining, seeking the consent of the participant, and so many other aspects. The person should be willing to participate. If there is an interest, you need to pre-indicate. If there is conflict of interest, you also have to indicate because they want to judge your results based on that. So, but most of the times we want that the person's ID should not be reviewed. The person should feel free to participate. Participation should be voluntary. A question, there's another question. With respect to causes and drivers of a particular phenomenon, regression could be ideal, but the details of what you are trying to do will matter. The details of whatever you are trying to do will actually be so vital to help us in answering the question so that you understand better. So you have to give details of whatever you are studying. Another question here says, hello, please, the scope of the study the same as the delimitation of the study? The answer to that is yes. Some people call it scope, others call it delimitation. And so you can use the word delimitation or the scope. So, like we said, on the screen, we have the master class in data analysis, learn how to analyze your data. We'll talk about descriptive, standard deviation, we'll see percentage, frequencies, data visualization, we have to do with plots. We'll look at correlation, linear regression, hierarchical regression, moderating analysis, and we also have a bonus on mediation analysis with process. For those who don't know, the packages we will employ will be Stata, SPSS, Excel, and JABS. All of that on a single day. It's a whole loaded program. We'll start, it's on the 16th of October at First Links, and we have just 10 slots. Yes, the slot just 10. For those, if you are, the price is 15,000, but if you are alone, we pay 15,000. If the two of you come together, you will pay 25,000. So that is a discount for those who may want to be two of them. Thank you. Anyone last question? Okay, there seems to be a question from those following from WhatsApp. The question says the training will take place for how long? It starts from 9 to 4 p.m. So it's approximately 8 to 9 hours. It's approximately 8 to 9 hours. The question is it a crash program? Yes, but it's crash program of our data analysis program. But I'm sure we also have advanced techniques, and there are lots of things that we have not put in it, like basic concepts that lay the foundation. We'll dive into the major things. But if you take the data analysis training offered by FirstLinks, you actually start you from the basics, whatever you don't know. But here, we'll do basics, but we'll not be able to review concepts and so many other things that we do as a program is concerned. So to an extent, it's a crash program, but it's loaded because we will deal with practical data. You'll be able to, the statistical technique will be shared and you have access to them even for free. Please take the size. So with that, I'm sure no question. Now, apart from this, we equally have our data analysis training, and the next webinar will be indicated when we have it. I think the team will sit and decide. We equally said FirstLinks, this program is sponsored, is powered by FirstLinks, which is what? FirstLinks Foundation. So we are promoting academic excellence. Anybody who has the knowledge, who has something that you think you can teach, who can host you so that you do a training on this, anything with respect to help researchers, whether it's about how to write problem statement, the teacher review from your own dimension, how to write papers, how to go about publication, to talk about citations, and so on and so forth. It's a community. We can work together. Let's work together. You just have to contact one of the admins, send in your area of interest, and they'll go see how to post you for the next edition. However, we'll communicate when we'll have the next edition. If you're not on the WhatsApp, please do join. If you have not joined the Facebook, our Facebook page is FirstLinks Academy, YouTube FirstLinks Academy. There you have access to some of our courses because at times we do stream our classes live. So even if you are not a member, you can still benefit from the classes if you are subscribed to our YouTube channel. We do have live classes on YouTube, our data analysis classes. Thank you, and stay blessed. See you. Share. You can share the content. You can go on YouTube and share. What this program was streamed live on YouTube. You can go and share, go and like, subscribe, and you can still listen for the listen or view, review, whatever. We'll send the slides. If you've not received, we'll send them. And thank you as we end the meeting here.